benefits of a frisbee. It's a great rolling tray. Keeps the wind from stealing part of the cut. Sorry, Google Com. My real name is Laemmle. And I loved reading books for as long as I can remember. My dad used to read me books. Harry Potter, Narnia, Lord of the Rings. For a long time it didn't cross my mind to write. I really loved sports, even more than books I'd say back then, or at least more than writing. But I guess my origin story is I broke my lumbar while wrestling, and it wasn't a conscious decision at the time, but I think that implication that I wouldn't continue to be an athlete in college. A month later was when I started to write my first book in high school, and kind of just ran with it. Started in fantasy, and then as things developed, I got more into the beat writers like Kerouac and Henry Miller, pre-beat, but eventually ended up fusing those forms where I am today with really enjoying writing magical realism, where it's about still writing about what I know, but not being constrained by real events, and using a wacky plot to convey truths. I mean, a book is, I think, destructive more than creative. You're taking everything and you're trying to distill it into a book-sized package, with maybe 100,000 words. It's a tall task. But I would say I can't not write. I genuinely think I would still write books if I was on shipwrecked on an island with no hope of even finding people again. I think I would still write books just for myself to kill the time. This new book I've been working on, Gringo, it actually, at its earliest kernel, was a very different project. I had planned to write something almost 3 years ago. I was still living in Austin, and it was going to be about deal with non-monogamy, and really the earliest parts of the book that stuck in the final are these two cherubs, kind of like gargoyles, who they come alive out of a statue and are kind of some of the narrators in the story. And it was interesting to see how the book developed. I mean, my life changed so much. I went from being in a long-term relationship, very stable, living in Austin, to being very unmoored in the world and not knowing where I lived or if I lived anywhere. And Mexico really took me in, and as I traveled around and went to Guatemala and came back to Mexico and saw these places, I realized that the book that I had in my head was, the real form was about nomads and backpackers. It wasn't my life, but I found inspiration in the places I went and the people I met, and there was a real interplay with that whole life imitating art, where, yes, I mean, to some extent the book is modeled after my life, but to a probably larger extent, but at least even, I would say, it's my life over the last few years has been modeled after this book. I've gone to places. I've gone to Michoacan, to the Butterfly Reserve. I went there and then wrote a chapter about it the next day. I lived my life in a way that I was able to track certain events and be on the ground and notice the right details. Setting is so important because, I mean, if you compared fiction and philosophy, philosophy is like these ideas that you're trying to get out, but fiction is a vehicle that humans are adapted to understand, through oral traditions. I think you could compare it to vitamin C versus eating an orange. Sure, if you want vitamin C, you can take vitamin C, but if you eat an orange, that's a mechanism that your body is adapted to absorb, and I think story is similar. And by putting something in a believable setting where the reader goes, oh, I understand what this is, I'm getting to know things more, it reflects our own way we navigate the world through a semi-cohesive narrative that our ego is bound to. So it was important for me to get the details right, and I felt extra pressure. I mean, the book is called Gringo, so it is not shirking the idea that I am a foreigner living in and writing about Mexico. There's a great responsibility there, I think, to approach the subject with humility and also really take seriously the observation of what is around you, what are you trying to communicate, what do you want your reader to feel. I mean, it's great if someone is a nomad and has been all around Mexico and recognizes all these places I'm talking about. That's great, but you know, how do I reach the reader who hasn't ever set foot in this amazing country or in Guatemala? How do I convey that same sense of this paradoxical closeness that you feel when you're a solo traveler? Because people will ask sometimes if they don't know the world, like, oh, you're a solo traveler, don't you get lonely? And I'm like, I get lonely when I go back to the US and you know, people are all in their own zones. I mean, if I'm out here, especially if I'm on the road at a hostel, I mean, you just sit down, roll one of these, you got friends, you know, and odds are you have a lot more in common with them than even the friends you grew up with in a lot of ways, because you're bounded by openness a lot of the time, for better or for worse. And it's just special. I mean, I grew up going to summer camp. One of my friends told me he thinks I took to traveling so strongly because of that summer camp background. You know, growing up, you're seeing the same people every day. I mean, you get so close in just a couple weeks, and I think traveling is really like that in a lot of ways. It's beautiful. I find that when you can strike the balance between, you know, enough authenticity behind your characters to, you know, have them feel real but still have the freedom to move within the world, because, you know, if I can't just have my, you know, character based on myself and other people, but different things happening to them, because people respond differently and the world we live in shapes how we act. So I find that I start with these characters. So if someone's inspired by someone, it's like there's a piece of their soul, or, you know, maybe like the way you could take like a seed from a tree and, you know, plant it somewhere. Like, is that new tree based on the old tree? You know, it has a different environment. The nutrients, the climate around it shapes how it develops. And I think that the same way that a person individuates as they go through life, you know, grow older, my characters individuate from who they're based on as the story goes, because they're, you know, developing their own personalities. So is the starting point for Aaron Cassidy inspired by me? Yes, but he's entirely his own person, to the point that, having written the book, I can imagine us sitting down for a beer together without any overlap, I guess, or meaningful overlap that would prohibit our feeling distinct enough to get to know each other. Magical realism is an interesting subject to write in. I mean, Mexico lends itself so well to that magical aspect, not just because of its own art history, but just that sense of blurred lines of a living mythology that is present in people's daily lives. One way I love that I heard magical realism described was, you have a story where there's moments of hyperrealism and moments of magic that are blended, but as opposed to fantasy, where the magic is like, oh, it's magic, you actually have the magic be some of the most sober moments and present moments in the story. So I'll have, you know, something magical happen and it'll just be, you know, accepted as real. Whereas actual reality, where no laws of physics are being broken, is outlandish and absurd. Because I often have that feeling. I mean, when I think of the magical moments in my life, it's not these moments of like everything going on. It's these moments of stillness and centeredness. So I love getting to play with that, and I think that people are able to engage with that because they feel the same way about their own magical lives.